Pete Sessions, congressman from our area, is chairman of the Rules Committee in the House of Representatives, and I'm going to guess that quite a few of you don't know much about the Rules Committee. How many of you think you know what the Rules Committee does? Okay, now that wasn't very many hands went up just then. If you were a member of Congress, you'd know what the Rules Committee does, because if you had a bill that you wanted to go to the floor of the House and you wanted people to vote on it, you have to first go through the Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee has the power to change your bill. And the Rules Committee sets the rules under which your bill goes to the floor, if it goes there at all, and it can stop your bill from going there. And they can determine whether there's going to be a debate on your bill, whether there can be amendments to your bill. So in a nutshell, Pete is probably the second most powerful person in the House of Representatives, second only to Speaker Paul Ryan. So 2 years ago, Pete called me and asked me to come to Washington. He said, look, this health care problem is real risky for the Republican Party, so we could lose the House of Representatives if we screwed this up. And he said, we need you to come help us put together an alternative. Well, at that time, I was already helping Bill Cassidy over in the Senate, and as one thing led to another, and I managed to put the two together, and we came up with a pretty good bill. But before I agreed to this, I said, look, I'm not interested in a health plan that only appeals to Republicans. That doesn't seem to me to make a lot of sense. That was the mistake the Democrats made. I mean, they had a health plan that only Democrats voted for, and for the next 7 years, Republicans promised to repeal it. And every time they ran for office, every time they talked to their constituents. So I said, I want a health bill that appeals to everyone. So it appeals to the left because we're going to insure more people. You know, Obamacare left 30 million people uninsured, but it's going to appeal to the right because we're going to base our reform on free enterprise principles. So Pete said that was good, and we were serious about this. Bill Cassidy has been talking to Democrats in the Senate, and Pete talked to a few Democrats in the House. And have any of you ever seen the AFL-CIO building in Washington? Have you ever seen the building? Any of you been inside the building? I spent a whole day there. It's a really nice building, by the way. I now know where the union dues go. Well, at first they were a little skeptical of me, and they didn't know quite how to deal with me. They knew I was coming politically from a place that they didn't come from. But by the end of the day, I think I had most of them agreeing that what we were talking about was better than Obamacare, and these are the labor unions who are saying this. Well, Paul Ryan, on the other hand, went behind closed doors, came out with his own health care plan, and announced to the party, this is it, this is all you're going to get, take it or leave it. And furthermore, Paul Ryan said, I'm going to do this in a way so that we don't need a single Democratic vote, which is another way of saying I'm not going to ask for a single Democratic vote. And of course, when you do that, if you know you're going to get no Democrats, you have to get almost every Republican. And of course, he didn't. And we went through, you all saw what we went through. Now we're over in the Senate, and there's no way that 50 senators are going to vote for the bill the House sent them. You know, when the Yakuza of Japan, when they commit a major mistake, do you know what they do? They have to sever one of their, they have to sever one of their fingers, and then they have to offer the finger to their superior by way of atonement. I've often thought that if members of Congress and the administration had as much honor as the Japanese mafia, we'd have a lot less finger pointing in Washington. Now, I want to give you a different way of thinking about politics that is not very popular in Washington, and I call this the win-win policy reform. Win-win means everybody gains, nobody loses, and economists have a technical word for this. It's called Pareto optimality. But we don't have to use a technical word. It just means nobody loses. Now, you would think that if there was a way to change public policy and everybody is better off, nobody is worse off, that would be like gold to politicians. I mean, they don't have anybody angry at them. They can do something that literally makes every constituent happy. But it turns out that that's not the way it works in Washington, that if a politician did this, the Republicans would say to the Republican representatives, well, wait a minute, Democrats like this. If Democrats like it, you didn't fight hard enough. And the Democrats would say to their representative, well, wait a minute, if Republicans are voting for this, you didn't fight hard enough for our interests. So it turns out that I think there are thousands and thousands of win-win policy changes that are potential in Washington that don't get done simply because of the toxic polarization that we now are witnessing. What most of the proposals coming out of Washington are, in my opinion, are eat your spinach reforms. And that means that we're going to reform an institution, somebody's going to have to suffer, somebody's going to have to bear a cost. So if you think about the way Republicans and Democrats talk about Social Security or about Medicare, for Republicans, we're going to cut benefits. It may be for young people, for future retirees, but we're going to cut benefits. For Democrats, we're going to raise taxes. So for both parties, somebody's going to bear a cost. Neither party is thinking of how do we do this in a way so that young people and old people and taxpayers all come out ahead. Now, I think, as I said, there are tens of thousands of win-win policy changes that are possible, and I'm going to give you just a few examples. In the VA system, if a veteran goes out of the system to a private doctor because he gets tired of waiting for care, and he gets a prescription, he can't take that prescription to the VA where drugs are cheaper unless he goes to a VA doctor and gets a second prescription, all right? So veterans are the only people in our whole society that have to get two prescriptions before they get the drug that they want for the price they want to pay. Now, what if we just dropped that rule? What if we said, no, you don't have to go see a second doctor. The first prescription is fine. It works for the rest of the country. It'll work for you. That would seem to lower the cost then to the veteran. They could get access to cheaper drugs. And at the same time, the VA wouldn't have to employ as many doctors. That's what I call a win-win reform. Taxpayers gain, veterans gain, the VA system as a whole gains. Telephone consultations. We have Teladoc here in Dallas. They have 11 million customers across the country. You call up, you're on a business trip, you run out of your prescription, the phone is answered by a doctor. You haven't met him, but he can call up your medical records electronically and prescribe your medicine for you. That costs on average about $35. If you went to see a real doctor, face-to-face, that would be probably more like $100, 3 times as much. If you went to an emergency room, the average cost there is $500. So my question is, why don't we let the Medicaid patients and the Medicare patients have access to this service? And it would seem greatly increase access to medical care and greatly reduce costs to taxpayers. Walk-in clinics, Minute Clinic, CVS pharmacies here in Dallas. You have an earache or a sore throat. The charge on average is about $75. Medicaid only pays $35. So that means that the Medicaid patients don't get to go to the Minute Clinic. Well, if they don't go to the Minute Clinic, where do they go? Well, they will go down to Parkland Hospital, where they could wait 5-6 hours or longer, depending upon the day of the week or time of the day. Why not let Medicaid patients have the same deal the rest of us have? We could save money for Medicaid and make care more accessible. On the East Coast and the West Coast, we have what I'm calling Uber Dr. House calls. That's not the word they use. But at nights and on weekends, you call the doctor. He's there in less than an hour, he or she, and the cost is $100. As I said earlier, if they went to the emergency room at night or on the weekends, the average cost is $500. So why don't we let Medicare cover this? Care gets more accessible, we save money for the taxpayer. Here are just a few examples of the principle. Now, when I present these ideas to the bureaucrats in Washington, they have a quick comeback. And the comeback is, well, no, wait a minute, Goodman. If you make it easier to get prescriptions, people are going to get more prescriptions, right? If you make it easier to see a doctor, they're going to see a doctor more often. So the cost may not go down at all. In fact, it may go up. And I can see that that is a possibility, but I have an answer to it, and I call it the trial and error principle. Now, here's one of these graphs, and you probably thought you'd never see another one of these when you took your last course in economics, but this is really an easy graph to understand. So let's imagine this is the number of prescriptions that are going to be filled by people who go to veterans who go to private doctors. And so the way I want to start this out is I want to drop the rule that we have to see 2 doctors before the veteran gets his prescription. But in the beginning, I want to say, okay, veteran, you don't have to get a second doctor to prescribe here, but when you go to the VA pharmacy, you're going to have to pay the price equal to the private price, not the special discount the VA gets. So that means we're way over there on the y-axis. We haven't given the veteran any real economic gain. We've made healthcare a little more accessible to him. We're probably saving money for the government right now because it doesn't have to hire as many doctors for that second prescription. And now what I want to do is the trial and error. I want to start lowering or raising, if you like, the discount that the veteran gets, raising but going down that curve. And so as we do that, the benefit to the veterans begins to fall, and the cost of the government begins to rise. I'm going to accept the possibility that people just fill more prescriptions if we make it easier for them to do that. It'll probably be true of me, probably be true of you. But we get out to the ideal point, and that's where the marginal benefit to the veteran equals the marginal cost to the taxpayer, and that's where the 2 lines cross. And how would we find that? Again, through trial and error. So in between the crossing point on this graph and all the way back to the y-axis, those are all that area. Those are all opportunities for everybody to be better off. And again, I think there are tens of thousands of such opportunities in the government. What I want to do now is take this idea of win-win and apply it to the most difficult programs there are to change, and that is the social insurance programs. What conservatives need to understand, and often they don't understand, is that social insurance is there for a reason. The reason we got big government in the 20th century is not because we were giving a lot of money to poor people. We got big government in the 20th century because government stepped in to provide families with the kind of insurance that they found it difficult to buy in the private marketplace. Now, for as long as we've been on this planet, human beings have faced certain risks, and they include the risk of growing too old and you can't support yourself anymore, or dying too young and leaving your family, your dependents destitute, becoming disabled, not being able to work and support yourself and your family, facing a major health event, not in these days, not being able to get medical care, or becoming unemployed and finding out the skills you have are no longer wanted by the market. Now, if you think back from the Garden of Eden all the way up to the beginning of the 20th century, how did mankind deal with those risks? Family and extended family, right? I mean, they didn't turn to government. They turned to their tribe, their family, and they viewed their children as a retirement program. You had children, that was your Social Security, that was your Medicare. I've tried to explain that to my daughter, Kara, many times, and to this day she doesn't understand the principle. Now, we move into the 20th century and families become dispersed. In any event, they become unreliable. And so all over the world, not just in the United States, every developed country, they're turning to government. And what are they getting from government? Government replaces the family, basically. And at the federal level, government's giving us Social Security, Medicare, disability, survivors, and the state and local level, it's Medicaid, unemployment, workers' compensation. All of this is simply government stepping in to help insure us against risk, and doing it in a way that, on the one hand, creates huge unfunded liabilities for all the senior programs and very perverse incentives for those programs, plus the unemployment and the workers' comp. And by perverse incentives, I mean in Chile, they've cut the cost of workers' comp in half by just privatizing it. They've cut the cost of unemployment insurance in half by privatizing it. So there's a lot of waste, a lot of perverse incentives in all of these programs. Now, I think that we can apply the win-win principle to all of these. Unlike the Republicans who are into this eat your spinach stuff, I want to find a way to do this that makes the young person and the old person and the taxpayer better off. And here is the principle I want to leave with you. Whenever there's a difference between the way that a beneficiary looks at a program and the way the government representing the taxpayer looks at a program, there's an opportunity for a mutually beneficial exchange, all right? There just has to be a difference. And for Social Security, I'm picking out one of those differences, and that's the difference in how we discount benefits in the future. So all a discount rate means is what are you willing to trade off between present and future. And for Social Security, we have a very risky program, actually, from the point of view of a 21-year-old, because we know that in the future that revenues will fall way below costs, but we don't know today how the government will deal with it. We don't know whether it will cut benefits, whether it will raise taxes, and all that is very uncertain. But here we have an individual, and I assume that he's at the retirement age. He has another 20 years to live, and we take his benefits, and the government, the way the Social Security trustees decide how much we owe this individual is they discount it at the government's borrowing rate, which in the past has been about 3% real. Okay? And that's the way the trustees do it. Now, today it would be a little lower than 3%, but I'm just using 3% because that's the historical rate. Now, but that's not necessarily the rate at which citizens discount the future. So if we think that this person's discount rate would be 6%, then he will value that sum of money, that promise from Social Security, at about 60% of what the government calculates is its cost. In other words, the government is way up on that high bar, the individual is down on the 60% bar. Now, if the individual has a 9% discount rate, and remember, some people are borrowing on their credit card for 17 and 18%, so that's not inconceivable. If they discount the future at 9%, then Social Security is worth to this retiree only half of what we calculate it costs the taxpayer. Well, what that means is that we could make a deal with that individual. So we could write him a check, and we could say, we'll write you a check for 1/2 of everything we think we're going to pay you, and both the taxpayer would be better off and he would be better off. Now, this is a second important principle. We can't allow this guy to go spend all the money. In other words, we can't let him go out and go around the world consuming all of this money and then come back next year and say, now I'm impoverished, now I need back into the Social Security system. So whenever we do this, we need some way of ensuring that if we give people a sum of money and we opt them out of Social Security, that some of that gets set aside for future years. So we have to have a plan that protects the government, which means protects the taxpayer from the beneficiary gaming the system in the future. This is a kind of a complicated graph. It was created by Tom Saving, who is down at Texas A&M. He was a former trustee of Social Security and of Medicare. And let me just go over it real quickly. Those alphas across the top, those are measures of risk averseness. So the higher the alpha, the more risk averse the individual is. Risk averseness means he doesn't like risk. And so as you go to the right, he dislikes risk more. That second line is for a 20-year-old, the value of Social Security, and it's negative in all cases. And the more risk averse he is, the more negative it is. So what negative means is that this individual, this 20-year-old with an average income, expects to pay more in taxes over the remainder of his work life than he'll get back in benefits after he discounts it all back to the present. Now, this final third line is a measure of how much we would have to give this individual in order to induce him to give up his right to Social Security. What would it take, what kind of deal could we make with him so he opts out of the system, and when he retires, he would no longer require Social Security benefits from the government? The answer is we could do this for the average 20-year-old earning an average income for about, with an average degree of risk averseness, for about 4.5% of payroll for the rest of his work life. So what does that mean? It means today all these guys and gals are paying 12.5% to Social Security. We could say to them, oh no, we'll go all the way down to 4.5%. So instead of 12.5%, you only have to give us 4.5%. In return for doing that, you don't pay any more taxes into Social Security, but also you don't draw benefits when you reach the retirement age. Again, we can't do this unless we require the individual also to put money aside in a safe place, growing at a safe rate, so that when he reaches retirement age, he doesn't try to undo the deal. Okay, so this is a win-win for everybody, provided that he doesn't get to game the system. It is important to begin thinking about this. My colleague Larry Kotlikoff says that the total unfunded liabilities in all these programs are $200 trillion, and this is a surprising fact. We're worse than Greece. You've been told how horrible the financial situation is in Greece. We're worse when you calculate it all, add it up, and divide it by our expected future income. Leave you with this final idea. What would the world look like if we privatized all the major social insurance programs? We need about 4% of young people's income to set aside for their Social Security. You need another 4% for Medicare. We need 1% for disabilities and 1% for long-term care. I call this the 10% solution. For 10% on average of young people's income set aside for the rest of their life, we can replace all these programs. One final thought, a lot of you knew me when I was at the National Center for Policy Analysis. About 2 years ago, Pete DuPont and I set up the Goodman Institute, which is really a virtual think tank. Unlike our previous work, this is very, very focused. We're very focused on public policy. We have the best tax people in the whole world. We have the best healthcare people in the whole world. And we have the best social insurance people. And a lot of what we do with the Independent Institute, and it's been a very good relationship, David, and I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.